Hello, I'm Simon Hodgkins, and welcome to the Global discussions with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Simon Alexander Ong. You're very welcome to the podcast, Simon. And I want to start by asking you to tell us a little bit about Simon Alexander Ong, a little bit about your story, your journey, and everything that you're involved in. So straight over to you, Simon.
Well, first of all, Simon, thank you so much for having me on your show and to have the opportunity to share not just my story, but what I'm up to today. So I grew up here in the United Kingdom. I grew up in a small town called Dartford, which is in the southeast of the country. And it wasn't until I got accepted at the London School of Economics that I moved to London to begin life as a student. And throughout my upbringing, I had this mistaken belief that success was defined by my job title. It was Simon, be a banker, be a doctor, be a lawyer, be an accountant. And if I achieved one of those job titles, then I would be considered a success, not just by my family, but those around me. And so after graduating from the LSE, I decided to embark on a career within the financial services sector, except this was the middle of 2007, a year before the global financial crisis. And just to make things a little more interesting, the first company that I signed on with was Lehman Brothers, which collapsed into administration just over 12 months after I started as a graduate. Now, if you have ever gone through redundancy or restructuring or having to find a new job because for whatever reason the one you wanted just vanished, then you can probably relate as to how scary and uncertain that moment was for me. In hindsight, however, it was an utter blessing in disguise because it kickstarted the longest journey that we as humans make, the inches from our heads to our hearts. Now, it is never an easy journey, but it is the most important that we will ever embark on. And even though I was in and out of the industry for nearly 10 years, it got me asking myself three very powerful questions. The first was, what did success mean to me? The second was, what did fulfillment look like? And the third, what sort of impact did I want to have in the world? And those questions are important. If you haven't asked yourself those questions before, I highly encourage you to do so. First reason, because if you look at those around you, what you will observe is that many are exhausted, not because they are physically doing too much, but because they are doing too little of the things that bring them joy, and because often they are running someone else's race. And second, if there's anything I've learned through my journey, is that our value as humans is determined by how much more we have given to the world than we have taken from it. That is all about impact. And so as I sat and I reflected on those questions, it led me to understanding that my vocation lay in helping people. I just didn't know what that would entail. And I remember my wife showing me an advert that came up on her newsfeed about a coaching seminar that was taking place across the weekend. And she said to me, Simon, you should go and check this out. It doesn't cost you anything. All you will lose is 2 days of your time, but I think you might enjoy finding out a bit more about this area. So I go along, a little skeptical, admittedly, but by the end of that 2 days, I say to my wife, I want to sign up and I want to learn the skill of coaching. And I was doing this on the side of a 9-to-5 job. 2.5 years later, I exit and I say to myself, I want to start making steps to becoming a coach full-time, i.e., to transition from being an employee to an entrepreneur. And that was really the beginning of what I now get to do today, which is to work with some of the most extraordinary people around me, CEOs, celebrities, TV presenters, authors, entrepreneurs, Michelin star chefs, speaking at some incredible companies and conferences across the planet. And more recently, having landed a book deal with Penguin, the world's largest publishing house, to write my first book, Energize.
Wow. That's a great introduction, Simon. Thank you. You mentioned a few things there. Um, I love the comment about, you're in somebody else's race. You're actually running somebody else's race. That's a great way of explaining it. And you mentioned as well some of the work that you do with celebrities, TV personalities, individuals, but you've also worked with people like Sky News, BBC
Mm,
Radio. You worked with LBC Radio.
mm,
You've done things with Barclays. You've done things with Virgin, the Guardian newspaper group, media group, the Huffington Post, Forbes. I mean, you name it, the list goes on and on and on. And it's a huge, I suppose it's a huge jump from where you were with your sort of academic studies at LSE,
mm.
through to, just saying, well, I'm going to go and check out this coaching for a couple of days, and then all of a sudden this huge pivot, which has led to everything that you do today, and that huge deal with Penguin, which is,
Mm.
fantastic. The book is, Energize the book. I'm sure we'll come on to that in a moment or two. But like, from Simon Alexander Ong to Simon Hodgkins, there's another Simon that everybody I'm sure is familiar with, which is Simon Sinek.
Mm.
And I think, when Simon Sinek says that your book is exactly what we need at this moment in time, when he goes out of his way to say that, and he says, look, with all the strains and the pushes and the pulls on our lives today, all these stresses that we have, I know Simon Sinek says that, look, this is the simple way for these steps for everybody to basically grasp, to take hold of, to help them energize, and he's in
Mm.
his own right. I mean, for people that may not be familiar with Simon Sinek, although I think most people are, he's a New York Times best-selling author. Start
Mm.
with Why was a huge success for him. So, from Simon Sinek or Marie Forleo or TV celebrities in the UK, you really are doing the rounds. And everywhere I look, Simon Alexander Ong is either speaking at the conference or he's speaking about his book. So congratulations on that success.
Thank you so much, Simon. And one of the messages I do want to share when people listen to the story is that it wasn't an overnight success. And I think that's important to understand, is that we live in a world in which people want things now, but we also have to balance that with the understanding that you have to put the work in. To put this journey in context, I enrolled in, and the place that I got my qualifications from was an institution called the Coaching Academy. And I enrolled in 2012 and I graduated in 2024. Sorry, 2014. I graduated in 2014, about 2 years later. Now, from that first moment of signing up to learn about coaching to where I am today, that is nearly 10 years. And the transition from being a full-time employee to working as an entrepreneur full-time, that has only been a 5 or 6 year journey. So I think it's important to, yes, I mean, it's great when you hear about the book and the name and the people I've worked with and where I've spoken at, but you've also got to understand that it all didn't come at once. You've got to do the work, you've got to lay the foundation, you've got to build the relationships. All of these things come with time.
And do you know what, Simon? That's a great segue into my next question, because one of the things that I was keen to explore with you was exactly the point that you kind of touching on there.
Mm.
It was about the journey. Now, I made a comment a moment ago saying, look, you're everywhere. I see you everywhere, right? Which is great, and that's sort of where you're at now. But people don't see the journey. They don't see the transformation. They don't see the starting it as a side thing and then it sort of taking over and you exit another career, etc. But the question I've got for you is, were there some step changes when you look back and say, look, I could feel it moving, I could feel myself changing gear, or I
Mm.
had to bring in this team, or I had to work with these people, or I had to think differently? What goes into it today compared to what went into it maybe those 3, 4, 5 years ago? Because it must be a different process now, because there's no way you could do what you do working the same way you did 4 or 5 years ago. Am I right in saying that?
Definitely. I mean, the process and the approach to what I do today is completely different. I mean, to give people a picture of how it started and where it is today, I started this as a side hustle because I had no idea where this would lead. And so I would be doing my 9 to 5. And the analogy I like to bring to mind is I felt like Superman, but without the superpowers. So I would be going to the office dressed in my suit, my tie, and I would have my gym bag, but in my gym bag would be my now customary black t-shirt and jeans. And so when I had a meeting during the day or there was a conference I wanted to go to, I would make up the excuse that I had a client meeting. And I would go to the toilet cubicle, out of my suit, into my black t-shirt and jeans, down the fire exit, and out to the conference, and no one would see me in my black t-shirt and jeans to build the momentum for my side hustle. Now, the moment I started to feel that my side hustle was my new life was the fact that I was beginning to wake up every morning more excited about what I was doing outside of work than doing the work I was actually being paid for. And there was this point where I got to 3 paying clients. And I remember saying to myself, I cannot get a 4th client, because if I get a 4th client, my work that I'm being paid for in my 9 to 5 will suffer. And people will find me out because I just can't balance 4 clients while keeping down a 9 to 5 and performing well. And I remember I came to this moment where I said, okay, I've got 2 choices. Either I continue in my 9 to 5 and I limit myself to 3 paying clients, or I quit and I see just how far I can go in building this business. And that back and forth in my head lasted around 3 or so months, thinking, do I quit? Do I not quit? Do I quit? Do I not quit? And I remember handing in my resignation Christmas that year, and a huge weight fell off my shoulder because now I could focus all of my energy on building this business. And at the time, all I wanted to do was build a successful coaching practice. I wanted to work one-on-one with people. I had no idea that a couple of years later, one of my clients would then say, Simon, I love the work that we're doing. I think you would be great speaking at our leadership seminar. And I said to them, are you sure? I'm happy to give it a shot if you trust me, but I want to make sure I do it justice. And so I did it. And that opened up a new career in speaking. And then the speaking got me the attention of media outlets like BBC and Sky News. And that's how I got the opportunity to speak in front of a bigger audience. And then naturally that led to conversations with Penguin. And so I think one of the beauties of following what you are meant to do is that you suddenly, through your energy, through the way you show up, you become a magnet for opportunities.
I love that. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that, because it's important, as you say, that people understand just a little bit about the journey and the step changes. And you were kind of torn between that 3 months with thinking, you know, am I doing the right thing here? Should I? Can I? Will I? And, you know, sometimes it takes a little bit of time for things to go, but it is nice to hear about and then one of my clients said, do you want to speak at an event? And that leads to the next thing. And I end up opening now you're a very successful international speaker now, and you're on some of the world's biggest media stages in terms of news, 24 news channels, etc. And of course the Penguin book. So one of the other questions I want to ask you, if I can, Simon, is you've said something which really resonates with me, and it is the phrase, sometimes you have to slow down to speed up. And I'd love you to unpack that for our worldwide audience. So when you say, look, sometimes it's about slowing down to speed up, can you maybe share a bit of insight into that for me?
Sure. What I mean by slowing down in order to speed up is we're in a world now in which it is becoming harder and harder to stand out in amongst all of the noise that is out there. Now, if we go back in history, what we find is that the greatest breakthroughs, the most powerful insights, have often come not when you were sitting in front of your desk staring at a screen or paper or books, but by disconnecting. Whether we are thinking about Isaac Newton sitting under the tree and eureka, gravity. Or we think about Thomas Edison fishing with no bait, so no one, not even the fish, would disturb him. Now, what we are noticing here is that when we disconnect, when we slow down, we are actually connecting ourselves to our wisdom and our inner compass. It is why I believe that silence is far from empty. It is full of the answers and wisdom that we seek. Now, you just have to go back a couple of years to the COVID pandemic to understand that when we couldn't go outside, the only place that we could go was inside. This is where people started to reflect. Am I doing the job that I want? Am I in the career that I love? And because all of us had this opportunity to slow down, guess what? When the world opened up, we started to hear these terms such as the Great Resignation, quiet quitting, because people now were taking responsibility for their life and the direction it was heading in. In other words, they were speeding up. They were now moving forwards with intention on a path that they were passionately interested in. By slowing down, they were able to speed up in the path that they were meant for. And so that is why, for me, when we look at our diary or our calendar, we want to make sure that we are as quick to schedule me time as we are saying yes to business meetings, social events, or booking our holidays. Because when we start saying yes to me time, what happens is you create space for beautiful insights and wisdom to flourish.
That's great. I love creating space for those beautiful insights. That's wonderful. Thank you for unpacking that a little bit for our listeners, Simon. I really like that. And it speaks to something that you emphasize a lot, which is, having this life of meaning. You talk about that a lot, having this life of purpose and fulfillment. And on the back of that, do you think that sort of post-pandemic, if that's indeed where we are, do you think it's fundamentally changed forever? Because there's a bit of a push back to the old ways of thinking, but there's a growing realization that it's different now. Is that kind of where you think we're at? Or is that sort of what you're out there talking to people about, how to energize their life?
I certainly think one of the biggest consequences of the post-pandemic world is employers are more open to listening to new ways of working. Pre-pandemic, if you were to say to an employer, we should employ flexible working, we should give people a chance to work remotely, they would say, we are simply not built to work remotely. We need our staff in the office every day of the week. What the pandemic did is it forced everyone to work from home. Now that we've come out of the pandemic, I think that employers are more open to thinking differently. And I think that's great, because what it teaches us is that unless we are open to learning and adapting, what happens is we get defeated by a changing world. But if we are open to learning, new perspective, and being adaptable, we become better surfers on the waves of change ahead.
Yeah, 100%. And it's back to what you're saying, isn't it? Like, I've got that picture of you having to get up from the office floor, go and hide, change out of the suit into the black t-shirt and the jeans, get down the fire escape so nobody knows. And, that was kind of an institutionalized thinking. It was a way of behaving, a way of dressing. And some places are still a little bit like that. Whereas it's changed fundamentally now, this world of work from anywhere, and really focusing on what you want. People have started, I think you were saying there during the pandemic, people were forced almost to look inside, to think about what they wanted. So thank you. Now, let's just finish off a little bit about the book, because I want you to maybe just, and look, you've done this many hundreds and hundreds of times, so I'm sure this is going to be really easy for you. But for people that haven't actually purchased the book yet or read the book, can you maybe take a little bit about this the magic of making the most of every moment and what Energize is about?
Sure. So in essence, the book talks about how you can transform your life and your career when you transform your energy. Now, when I talk about energy, I think about energy in four forms. We have the physical, the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual. Now, most of us, especially when we begin a new year, is we focus exclusively on the physical. So physical energy is you getting sufficient rest, you eating well, moving your body. This is all to do with physical energy. However, we tend to neglect the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual. And when we do that, we are starting each day and moving through each week and quarter with an energy deficit. So when we begin to understand how to improve our energy in those areas and also our relationship with our own energy, what happens is we not only supercharge our career, but we supercharge our life and our impact.
I couldn't agree more. Love that. Thank you, Simon. I want to change gear ourselves now. Thank you for everything that you've shared. There's been some wonderful insights there, but I want to ask you a few quick questions before we run out of time. Is that okay? Now, I have to ask you about your own learning style. When you read, do you read or do you read for pleasure? Do you read for business? Is it a nice mixture of both? Are you an audio book kind of person? Do you like to hold the physical book, or do you not like books at all and you just find yourself scouring the web or having conversations with people? How does the learning experience work for you, and what kind of things do you onboard when it comes to information?
Sure. So I guess if I had to describe my learning experience, the one word that comes to mind is immersive. Now, what I mean by that is I don't adhere to one style, because I understand that at any given moment, another one of my senses could take in information that one of the options may not. So for example, I love reading physical books because I can highlight things, but I also listen to audiobooks because I might be traveling, I might be on the train, I might be doing something with my children. And so audiobooks are great for that. I also like to read articles online or on my iPad. I also like to learn from conversations, whether it's with mentors or speakers or coaches or people in my mastermind groups. And so immersive is a learning style that comes to mind, because I think when I bathe my mind in all of these different options, what happens is my mind starts connecting all these different insights. And that's what I love. And so when I read and learn, I read and learn personal development, business, entrepreneurship, biographies. Those things tend to get my mind buzzing. So for me, my work is part of my life. And because I love it so much, it's part of what I read every day.
Fantastic. Thank you. I want to also ask you a question about inspiration. People that you admire, that you look to, that have maybe inspired you along the way, or if not a person, or if there's too many to mention, maybe it's a certain trait or a certain characteristic. When you think, now this could be as far back as your early childhood, or it can be something that happened to you yesterday. But when I ask you that question in terms of people that you most admire, what immediately springs to mind for you, Simon?
It's interesting because two types of people came to mind. On the one hand, people I admire who've helped me in my career, but also people I'm grateful for, because they've also had a very powerful influence on my journey. So people admire the obvious names such as, Simon Sinek, Tony Robbins, the people in my industry, people that I've been grateful for the impact of my life. First person is my wife, because she's been with me since before I was on this journey. When I was in finance, she see me go through the ups and the downs and also the highs. And so she really knows what it's taken to have that persistence and resilience through the challenges. And then there's a guy called Mark Alfred Tidd. Now, I met this guy called Mark when I was still in employment, and I met him at a mutual friend's birthday. And he said to me, Simon, I'm running a mastermind group next week. Would you be interested in coming along? Now, I don't know what he saw in me, but I was just grateful for the fact he invited me to this mastermind group. And I met some incredible entrepreneurs in this group that really got me thinking about what was possible for my life. And the people I met through that group were incredible. They were supportive, they challenged me, they helped me. And I think that really gave me the initial rocket fuel I needed to get this thing off the ground. So Mark is someone I can be incredibly grateful for. And then, of course, all of my clients and the people that have believed in me, the people that have said, Simon, we want you to speak at this event. Simon, we want you to talk about this. If it wasn't for them believing in me or giving me the opportunity, perhaps I wouldn't be here speaking to you today, Simon.
Well, thank you. And it's great to hear that different types, and also a little bit of an explanation as to why they inspire you, or why they've motivated you, or why you sort of admire them. So thank you. The other thing I want to ask you is, at the time of recording, a lot of people, you mentioned earlier, when at the start of a year, people think a certain way. But when you focus on the next 6 to 12 months, are you planning that far ahead? Are you planning further out? What's taking up your mental capacity? What are you thinking about that you'd like to achieve in the coming year?
Sure. So when I think about the year ahead, the only question I have in my mind is, when I get to the 31st of December 2023, how will I know that Simon has had a productive year? That's the only question I'm worried about, because I also know that I cannot predict what the next 10, 11 months are going to hold. I mean, if we go back to this time in 2020, nobody predicted that in April 2020, a global pandemic would ensue and economies would just shut down. So the way that I plan my year outside of that question is actually in 90-day, what I call 90-day sprints. So I plan my year in 90 days. So from January to March, what are my focal points? What do I want to work on? What do I want to get in my diary? What time do I need for myself? What are the projects I want to say yes to? And once I get to the end of those 90 days, I review the first 90 days and I plan for the next one. Because again, things are going to change. I might suddenly get opportunities pop up that I never anticipated, and that will influence what happens in my next 90 days.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm reminded of what you said a little while ago, Simon. You were talking about when you came out of doing your studies and your education, and then you take a job in the big wide world of finance a year before the financial crash happens. And then, as we go into other new things, a pandemic happens. And do you think that's changed the way you operate in these 90-day cycles? Or was that something you've always done, or something you picked up a while ago?
One of the things I've come to realize is that many of us focus on things that we can't control. Whether there's a crisis, whether there's inflation, whether there's a war going to start, whether there's a global pandemic going to start. We can't control those things. And I used to get caught up in that. When Lehman Brothers collapsed, I said, why me? Why did the banking industry have to collapse just as I was getting started? But I can't control that. Over the years, what I've learned is it's more important to focus on what you can control. Because when you focus on what you can't, you become paralyzed by overthinking. When you focus on what you can, you not only become energized, but you take action. And the only thing you and I can control right now is what you do today, the choices you make today, how you spend your time today, how you show up today, because your today will determine the trajectory of your tomorrow.
Sage advice indeed. Thank you, Simon. Love that. Brilliant. And I suppose before we wrap up, I just want to ask you, is there any other area or topic or focus that you'd like to maybe share with our worldwide audience? And I also want to, of course, ask you about where people can reach out and get in touch with you. So if people want to find out more about the book, for example, or if they want to find out about your keynote speaking or your life and your executive coaching, where are you sending people to these days?
Sure. So I'll answer the second one first, and I'll loop back to the first. So you can find out more about my work at simonalexanderong.com. I am on all the major social media platforms. So if you prefer video, I've got a YouTube channel, Instagram and Twitter. The handle is at simonalexanderO. And I'm also on Facebook and LinkedIn. In terms of something to leave the audience with, I would like to leave them with a powerful reflection. that will hopefully ignite something in them. And it was something that I was reminded of when I became a father for the first time. It was a surreal moment because it was the same month that the United Kingdom went into its first lockdown. 4 days after, in fact, that the United Kingdom went into its first lockdown. And as a result, me as the partner to my wife was only allowed in the recovery ward for 1 hour after our child's birth. And I remember holding our daughter in my hands. And apart from the fact that I became flushed with love, this stark reminder came to my head. And it was the fact that we are a miracle. The fact that you and I were born is a miracle event in itself. Because I thought in that moment, what were the odds of me meeting my partner? What were the odds that we could give birth to children? What were the odds that my wife and I continue the unbroken chain since the dawn of civilization of our family tree? When you stack all those things together, you realize just how much of a miracle it is to be alive. And so as I thought about it, I noticed that so many of us wish we would win the national lottery or the regional jackpot, but we forget we already have won the greatest lottery there is going, the lottery of life. And the question I would love to leave you with is this: what are you going to do with that winning ticket of yours?
That is a beautiful way to end our discussion today, Simon. Thank you so much indeed for sharing that.
Thank you, Simon.
It brings us nicely to the end of this episode of the Global Discussion with award-winning life and executive coach, keynote speaker, author of Energize, and countless other things to come, I'm sure, Simon Alexander Ong. So thank you, Simon. Thank you to everybody who's been watching or listening to this episode. Of course, we would like you to like, follow, subscribe, do all the normal things that you do for a podcast. And I hope that you join me back here for more discussions with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. So Simon, it's been an absolute pleasure to catch up with you, my friend. I'll talk soon.
Thank you so much.